Now we're jumping into intermediate Photoshop tools. In this demonstration, we're going to start working with some of the type options that are available to you, such as learning how to warp type, using type as a clipping mask, creating a selection out of your type, and then using that to create a mask for a particular layer, and then converting type to paths or a shape that you can manipulate by dragging points of that shape. Let's see what I mean by all of this. So I've made a series of examples for you. I've made an example of warped type. I've made an example of using type to create a clipping mask, creating a mask out of a type selection, using type and converting it to a shape in order to adjust the shape and individually move the points to make a very stylized typeface from a basic word. So here are some of the examples that we're going to be working with. And we'll just jump in and start with kind of an easy one. So here I have some type. And if I use my type tool, all I did was actually just type to be warped. I just typed it in by clicking once and typing, and I just chose any old typeface will do for this example if you're following along. And notice how Photoshop has already made an extra layer for me, which I don't need at this point, so I'm just going to trash that. Now, if I wanted to warp this type, I would actually, one of the ways that I could do this is go under Layer and Type and bring up Warp Text. When I select Warp Text, this is the dialog box that comes up. And I can choose a style that I'd like to use. And you can try a number of different styles and kind of just see what types of warps are available. And then you can actually drag the amount of the warping and how much distortion is applied to, in this case, either end. So that's how you can warp text, and there are a number of different ways that you can do this. And there's a number of different types that are available to you. Some of the more popular ones, fisheye. I really kind of liked, I work with the arches quite often. There's just all kinds of fun things that you can do with this warp text. And once you seem pretty happy with the warp that you've made, then you just click OK. So that's a pretty easy one. Let's look at something a little bit more complex. So do you notice that this layer here is just an image layer, but do you see how it has this little character, this little arrow to the left of its thumbnail? That means, or that implies, that I've applied a clipping mask. And a clipping mask really just tells the Photoshop Layers panel to use this text below as a clipping mask. And so then it therefore applies the clipping mask to the type layer immediately below the image. Let's see how that works. So I'm going to turn these off, and you can kind of see how they're dependent too. Like this can be on, but when I turn the image on, you can see how it maintains that size of the letter forms below. So I'll just choose this image layer and turn it on to make it active. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to type text that's going to become my clipping mask. And I know the general size of the text I'm about to type because of this little blinking, flashing line. And so here I'm going to type, I don't know, let's see, we'll just type clip me for this clipping mask text. And I can use my move tool, which is usually a good choice to choose right after you've used the text layer, because usually you need to move the text into place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that type layer below the image layer. I can't see it. Oh no, what's going to happen? If I then select the image layer and use my drop-down menu in the Layers panel to create clipping mask, we see that that clipping mask has been applied, and that the little icon for the image layer has changed to having this associated arrow that's pointing down, and it lets us know it's associated with the layer below. Now, in the previous module, we talked about working with type to create a selection and then create a mask. It's very similar to the clipping mask. So I'll turn these two off. Here I have some type. And if I want to select this type, I have to be kind of careful. Maybe the easiest route is to select the background of this type layer. And the background has to include the interior spaces of the letter forms. It may be that I could have used a higher tolerance in my Magic Wand tool settings, but when I feel pretty comfortable that I've selected enough of the background, then I can select Inverse, which allows only the letter forms to be selected. I can then hide this layer. It maintains the selection. Notice how we have the marching ants still. And then I can choose the image layer, make it active, and create a mask, which I'm going to make sure that you can see is at the bottom of the layer panel. I can add layer mask, and there we go. We can see that the layer mask thumbnail has been added. And what's interesting about this method also is that I can unlink the mask and the image, and I can select either mask or image and move them around. So I can choose this thumbnail of the image, and with the move tool I can move that image behind the mask, which is very flexible and cool. Now let's see how that concept works with our clipping mask that we made. If I want to see some movement here, I can choose my text layer, and with the move tool selected, you can see that I can still move that text layer around, and it changes how that clipping mask is applied. So similar ideas, two different methods of creating this effect. Finally, I'm just going to go through what would happen if you wanted to convert or play with the shape of your text and make more of a stylized shapes. So if you're creating a design in which the letter forms are actually part of that design and aren't necessarily a headline or body copy that needs to be read. So what do you do if you want to convert type into a design element? Well, you need to actually convert it to a shape. With this type layer selected, I can go under Layer, Type, and Convert to Shape. What that does is it grabs the outlines or the paths of the letter forms, and you can see here in this layer that it has created a vector mask thumbnails. So it's going to treat each of these letter forms as vector shapes. And the neat thing is I can now manipulate and pull the points on the vectors just like you would any vector shape by using my direct selection tool, which is different from the path selection tool. Path selection tool will move, an entire path around, but the direct selection tool will actually allow me to select individual points on a path, and you can see that when I selected it, it went from being white or clear to black. It's a very subtle distinction, and I can click on that point and drag and click on points and drag and manipulate the text now as if it were any design object that I might add to my compositions. And I think that we have covered all of the type options that I wanted to introduce you to in this demonstration.